This particular module right here on motivation, it is really from the perspective of a manager, but you can also relate from the employee's perspective. So what are we going to do in this particular section? Well, we're going to define motivation and discuss its basic properties, and there are some interesting basic properties, and how that relates to performance. We're going to look at something called intrinsic versus extrinsic, or intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. There are two types of motivators. We're going to discuss the different factors that predict performance, which is really very important. We want to use motivation, or an understanding of motivation, or to predict someone's performance. You know, how will they be more effective at work? And we're going to look at employee engagement in terms of the workplace. We're going to look at two different kinds of theories. We're going to look at need theories and process theories of motivation, okay? In terms of need theories, we're looking at expectancy and equity and these sorts of specific theories. And that's generally what we're looking at in terms of the major things within this. The resources for this are found in Unit 4 and in Chapter 4 of the textbook. Always look at motivation and think back to World War II. Okay, Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of the Great Britain in the 1939-1945 window of World War II. And at that point in time, the Germans were trying to overrun most of Europe, including Britain. And there was quite a concern that the Germans were about to invade. And in fact, it was looking pretty gloomy. You know, if we think about our world right now today and all the bad stuff that's happening, you just multiply that by 10 or 100, and you got yourself in early 1940 Britain. Bombs were dropping, people were being killed. Other countries, looking across the English Channel, you could see France had fallen, Poland, all these places were falling to Hitler. Became aware that Hitler was killing people left, right, and center in terms of the Holocaust and these sorts of things. And it was just a bad time. And really, England was at its knees, because the fact was that all of the resources that we could possibly put into the war effort were being put into it. And people were starving. People were not living full lives. Children were taken away from their families and sent to Canada in order to get away from the war. You know, it was amazingly desperate times. Winston Churchill was a great leader, and he was a great leader because he had the ability to motivate people. And in a famous speech, a very famous speech that he made in the Parliament, he said, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, and we shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields, in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." And that is something that kind of epitomizes his leadership style, but also his ability to take people who are so downtrodden and so miserable in their lives because of the situation they found themselves in, and build up that humph in order to push through. And they did indeed push through. And Churchill has been revered for his efforts in keeping the British people motivated to win the war. So what exactly is motivation? Well, really, it is persistent effort. That's what it is. It is an ability to exert persistent effort at a directed goal. And so we got a lot of effort and a directed goal. When you think about you and what motivates you, what are the things that motivate you? I would think that if you're hungry, for example, you're going to be motivated to get something to eat. And the hungrier you get, the more motivated you are to get something to eat. And the hungrier you get, the more, as you get perpetually hungrier, it will drive you towards that goal very quickly. And that, so the hunger issue, or relieving the hunger, is a very strong motivator when you're hungry. But in terms of work, we have to think about, how do we keep people focused on the job and provide that persistent effort towards the goal of work. Okay, and there's been a lot of research done on this. And how in the heck do we say to people, here's your job, and they go and do it so that they're successful at it and we do achieve the goal? And how do we do it without beating people across the head? You know, this is really an approach that was taken in the early years to motivate people, was to threaten them, do it or else. Now, that approach we've seen has not worked very well. So what other approaches are out there that we could use in order to get people to move towards a goal, and not only move towards the goal, but want to move towards the goal? Okay, so that's really what we're looking at when we talk about motivation. So motivation is really driven internally. I am motivated because I'm hungry. That's an internal motivation, okay? But it could be external too. There's no food around. Nobody's put any food out. I can't eat. So as long as there's no food out, I'm getting hungry. And when someone starts putting food on the table, suddenly I can resolve that problem. So the external factors are like food out on the table. So it could be me thinking I'm hungry, or the presence of food around could be a factor that would stimulate me to go off and do whatever I want to do, like eat. So, motivation is internal, external, and from a job point of view, what we got to do is figure out how can we translate that internal and external factors into a job. And that's a real challenge. So motivation results from the interaction of both conscious and unconscious factors, such as the intensity and desire or need, incentive or reward value of the goal, and expectations of the individual and his or her peers. These factors are the reasons one has for behaving a certain way. So you think about that and break that down. We think about conscious factors. Okay, you think about it and you say, yeah, I'd like to get something to eat. I really would. That's a very conscious. But unconscious factors could be your brain stimulating yourself to think, hey, I'm getting hungry. Your stomach starts rumbling. You're not consciously causing your stomach to rumble. So there's unconscious factors as well. The intensity of it is one thing, how strong you feel. And certain things, you're very intense in getting it done. You think about something that means a lot to you. You're probably very focused on it, and you have a very strong desire in order to achieve it. We could also think about external factors such as incentives. If you do the job fast, you'll get paid twice as much. Okay, that's an incentive. Or that could be considered a reward too. If you do the job within a certain length of time, you get a bonus. Okay. You could also think about it from your expectations point of view. If I'm going to do something, work really hard at it, and I'm you're my employer, and you ask me to do something, and I work really, really, really hard at it, okay? Because you've got this incentive and a reward for me. And I expect, if I were to put that time and effort into it, that I'll be rewarded from it. Maybe a better job, maybe some praise, could be anything. What happens if I get it? If I get it, that reinforces my motivation, doesn't it? If I worked really hard and you say to me, Paul, boy, that's a really good job, I really appreciate it, here's a bonus, or here's a better job, or here's something like that, that matches my expectations. I expected that if I worked hard, I would be rewarded. I was. Great. What happens if the opposite happens? I work really hard, I do an excellent job in my mind, and you come out and say to me, gee, that was awful. You didn't do a very good job there. You should have tried harder. Okay, in my mind, I worked really hard. I did a really, really good job. But obviously in your mind, that just wasn't there. And the expectation that I had for rewards was taken away from it. What impact would that have on my ability to want to work hard next time for you? What do you think?
You wouldn't.
You just ruined it, right? You've ruined it for me. If I expected something good out of it, and I felt like I should get it, he didn't give it to me. you basically demotivated me. So we think about these things happening with people is that if you're a boss, you got to be careful to make sure that you set clear expectations for people and you live up to them. Because if you don't live up to those expectations, or people feel that their expectations fell short, what they expected and what they got was different, you could end up with a very demotivated staff. So if we look at motivation, you break it down into its components, okay? You could look at motivation and really tear it into 4 parts. Motivation is really focused on effort. How much effort do you put into something? So the strength of a person's work-related behavior. So if I put a lot of effort into my work, motivation is really, you can see that I'm motivated if I put a lot of effort into it. Persistence is another thing. If I work at it for an hour and I get tired of it and I never go back to it again, that's not really strong motivation. Motivation is really something that sticks with me and I keep trying. It's like, the ant in the rubber tree plant. That ant can climb the rubber tree plant, but he's got high hopes. So the persistence. A clear direction, or focus sometimes it's called. That is, you are focused at achieving that particular effort. And finally, a clear goal. So some sort of a clear goal. And I think if you thought about anything that you've done in your lifetime that you were motivated to do, okay? Anything that you thought that you're really well motivated to do. There's an effort, there's persistence, there's a clear direction, and a clear goal. So if we think about those 4 things make up the essence of what we call motivation. We study it, as we've already talked about, because it's important for organizations to understand what motivates people and how we can get the people that work for those organizations to work towards a goal that benefits the organization. And we think about how things are changing in our world, and this idea, you need a very strongly motivated workforce in order to move it along. And we hear tell of terminology like productivity. Productivity is a fancy word for how much you put in versus how much you get out. For amount of effort that you put in, what do you get out? And normally, a high productivity workplace has a certain amount of input that provides a great deal of output. So the more productive we are, it means that we get more and more and more output for an amount of input. You think about sawing off 2x4. Let's come up with a simple example. So here you are sawing off 2x4, and you have a handsaw, a blunt handsaw, and you're trying to saw it off. It would probably take you 10 minutes to saw off a piece 2x4. Now let's sharpen that handsaw. Okay, now we can do it in 5 minutes. Now let's get an electric circular saw. Now we can do it in 5 seconds. That's what we call productivity increases, right? So the amount of effort that is involved in order to saw off that wood went from 10 minutes down to 5 seconds. So that's a huge productivity increase. And that means that the amount of input that you need to put into it relative to the output is much different. This is, as I said to you at the beginning, when people think about motivation in the old world, in the old-fashioned world, the Charles Dickens, type of environment, there was no such thing as a study of motivation. There was no such thing. The idea that people had to be worked hard and had to be pushed hard was the prominent theory, okay? Douglas McGregor, this scientist who was researcher who was studying organizations, came up with this theory, and it's not rocket science, okay? It's not rocket science. He called it Theory X and Theory Y. Theory X, theory of motivation, basically says that managers tend to be not very good, don't have a very good thought of people, pessimistic view of people, not a very good thought. And that they assume that people are naturally lazy, and they really have to be made to like their work, have to be pushed hard, they have to be prompted, they have to be rewarded, they have to be punished, they have to be constantly watched over in order to to get them to do the things that they do. Okay, this is very much an old school traditional approach to management, which is you basically hold out a stick and you threaten to whip people if they don't do what you want them to do. Now, that's one extreme, okay? That's an old-fashioned extreme, that people are lazy and that you need to push them in order to get them to work. So if you think about a continuum where you had on one side, there was a Theory X manager who was very extreme, that people are lazy. On the other side of this continuum that McGregor came up with, he said, you know, there's a different type of manager out there, a different type of manager who believes that people are good and that all they need is a little bit of direction, and that if they can be given that clear direction and some help and some assistance and let them use their skills and knowledge, they will do a wonderful job. So Theory Y managers have an optimistic, positive opinion of their people. They use a decentralized, in other words, no one's looking over their shoulder, participative management style. This encourages a more collaborative, trust-based relationship between managers and team members. So on the opposite end of the extreme of Theory X was Theory Y. It says people are naturally good. They'll do the job. If they got the skills and they're allowed to do it, they'll do it. Most managers fall somewhere in between Theory X and Theory Y. Okay, Theory X is one extreme, Theory Y is the other extreme. Most managers fall somewhere in that continuum. Modern day managers tend to be more on the Y side, okay? We have to think of people as assets. We have to work with them, allow them to use their skills and abilities in order to do the job and be able to do the job very well. Old-fashioned managers or managers in places that tend to run out of business or disappear very quickly are managers that are more Theory Y, that says, Theory X, I'm sorry, that say, you know, people are lazy. You really need to push them. They're useless. If I don't have some stick out to beat them over the head to make them do what they need to do, they're never going to do anything. You don't see very many managers around like that anymore, thankfully. So what you have to do is to think of this managers world. If we view managers, we have to view managers somewhere along that continuum and say, are they more Theory X, which are people are lazy, or are they more Theory Y, which is people are good and then all you need to do is give them some clear direction.
A manager's attitude can greatly affect the work environment for employees. Today we're going to discuss McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. Perception that managers hold for their employees in the way that they generally behave. So to start out, we have Theory X. Managers who fall into the Theory X category tend to believe that most employees do not like working and will avoid it as much as possible. In order for their employees to get work done, the manager feels that they need to control, threaten punishment, and force workers to do their job. They also think that most employees prefer to be directed, that they'll avoid responsibility at all costs, and that they have low ambition. And lastly, they think that employees are motivated by fear and money. As you can imagine, a manager who would fall under Theory X tends to watch employees really closely. They'll tell the employees exactly what to do, what not to do, and generally punishment is more common than reward. They tend to not hand out tasks that include responsibility and take those on themselves and give more menial tasks to employees. On to Theory Y. As you can imagine, this is quite different from Theory X. A manager who tends to fall under Theory Y would assume that employees like to work, that people enjoy working towards a goal, that their commitment to goals increases based on the perceived reward for achieving them, that most employees seek responsibility, and that employees' imagination, creativity, and cleverness can be used to solve problems. They also believe that in an industry, the average person's intellectual potential is only partially realized. And lastly, people are motivated by a variety of rewards. So employees might try to find out what motivates each employee and try to reward them based on their unique motivators. Managers that have more of a Theory Y style tend to be more relaxed in their approach to management, where employees are more free to set their objectives, they maybe have some more authority and they also get more flexibility. Manager might try to build an employee up so that they can feel more empowered and feel comfortable making important decisions that relate to their position. So now that we've covered theory X and theory Y, I want you to think about your current and past employers and consider which traits they've shown, whether they've shown some from theory X or some from theory Y. Okay, drum roll. Now it's time for the quiz. We are going to go through a couple different scenarios, and I want you to guess whether it is theory Y or theory X. Susie's been working for Bill, the supermarket manager, for about 5 months. And she knows her job well, and she knows exactly what needs to be done. But every single morning, he comes in and watches her stack the shelves and nitpicks about every little thing, making sure it's perfect. Susie complies, but it makes her feel about this big. So is this theory X or theory Y?
So what do you think?
Managers
Oh,
can greatly affect.
Theory X.
Yeah, very much theory X. Bill just, says, I don't trust you, basically, and I'm going to tell you what to do.
Every single morning, he comes in and watches her stack the shelves and nitpicks about every little thing, making sure it's perfect. Susie complies, but it makes her feel about this big. So is this theory X or theory Y? And the answer is theory X. Emma is an entry-level marketing employee, and she works under Tina, who is a mid-level marketing manager. Emma is full of ideas for unique marketing campaigns, and while it's not necessarily her job, Tina encourages this. She shares her ideas with the other managers and sometimes with the CMO if she feels that it's a really strong idea. Emma absolutely loves that Tina sees her creativity and hopes to foster it. So what type of theory is this, X or Y? And the answer is boys. Today we're going to...
Oh my. Anyway, so what do you think?
Y.
Yeah, certainly. Very much a theory Y.
Emma absolutely loves that Tina sees her creativity and hopes to foster it. So what type of theory is this, X or Y? And the answer is theory Y. Teddy just came to tell Barb, his boss, that he had completed the spreadsheets for their upcoming meeting. He had stayed up all night working on them and had gone through them carefully to ensure that they were just so. Barb takes one look at them, and instead of saying anything positive about the spreadsheets, she immediately says, I don't like the look of it, and tells them to go change it. Teddy responds calmly to Barb, but then when he gets back to his room, he's just so upset. Her response to him just really makes him not want to work very hard for her. So is this theory X or theory Y?
What do you think?
X.
Certainly X. It's a classic example.
Theory X. Samantha works in sales, and John is her boss. She just landed a huge account, and she went in to tell him. John complimented her on how hard she's been working to land this account, and they did a little celebratory cheer. So which theory is this, X or Y?
What do you think?
Y.
Yeah, very clearly Y. He's very positive.
Theory Y. Alrighty. So today we've covered the basics of McGregor's theory X and theory Y. I want you to think about these two management styles and the effect that they have on employees. And just remember this as you move forward, if you get into managerial positions, if that's the route you want to go, just to be aware of how these affect others and the tone that you want to set. Thanks for watching, everyone.
So you can see that theory X and theory Y is one of the basics of motivational theory. Okay, it's a very basic concept, but we can see it because I think we can all relate to it. We've all had managers who are more one way than the other, and we certainly know which way that we would prefer. Another interesting approach and another terminology and concept that we all should be aware of is something called intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic, the word in is a critical thing, okay, stems from the direct relationship between the worker and the task and is internal and is usually self-applied. Work that you find interesting and rewarding, you feel good about your job and it motivates you. Okay, so we could think about the aspect of a job that you work at that you really, really, really enjoy. And if you notice, when you really, really, really enjoy it, time goes by fairly quick. It's not as if you're looking at your watch when you're looking at something that you're interested in. Okay? So intrinsic stuff is really the biggest motivator we have. If we think about what do we really want as humans, intrinsic reward is the greatest and strongest motivator. Stuff that is important to us. And our task as instructors is to make sure that we can make it relevant to you so that it becomes important to you, right? Otherwise, it's just externally motivated systems. Now, external or extrinsic, and the first two letters really give you what it is. Extrinsic motivation systems are really external to the task and is usually applied by someone other than the person being motivated. So you would think of things like that. You get bonus pay for your overtime and it motivates you. Okay. So it is something coming in that is a direct result of the job. Someone tells you to do something. Even to the theory X point of view, do it or you're fired. If we took a theory X point of view, that's certainly extrinsic motivation. Someone asks you to get it done before 4 o'clock. That's extrinsic motivation. If you get it done, I'll pay you a bonus. That's extrinsic motivation. Most of the things that we think about at work, that if we were asked, what do you think motivates you? Okay, most people will come up with extrinsic stuff first. Because extrinsic stuff is the stuff we normally see, because we can see the paycheck, or we can see the bonus, or we can see the extra week vacation, or we can see. Those are things we can see. And no question, they're important motivators, no question. But the fact of the matter is they cannot work in and of themselves. You need a combination of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. I often wrestle with this myself, for example. This idea of being on town council, any town councils that you're on, there is no extrinsic reward, or very limited extrinsic reward, by being on a town council. There's no real money in it. And there's not a lot that you can say that I get externally out of it. However, the major driving force, if you're interested in that sort of stuff, is the internal intrinsic rewards that you get from it. If you can grow your town or whatever. So, but you do need a balance. You have to be careful, as I often find out, because that can take a tremendous amount of your time. And so how do you find that balance between what you find intrinsically rewarding and what you need in order to live, which is the extrinsically rewarding material? And if we look at another little video here.
When it comes to motivation, there are two basic types. Extrinsic motivation has to do with performance goals where recognition is coming from some kind of outside force. Have you ever rewarded yourself with food? Studied to get the grade? Practiced to get the trophy? Or worked hard for the pay? That's extrinsic motivation, doing it for the stuff. But we know this stuff only lasts so long, which is why it really only works for simple tasks. Which is where intrinsic motivation comes in. Intrinsic motivation doesn't come from tangible stuff that you can touch and take. Intrinsic motivation has to do with doing stuff because you want to learn a new skill, because you have a thirst for knowledge. But we understand that tapping into intrinsic motivation, especially in an academic setting, can be difficult, but once you do, you will reap the benefits. Here's a few tips. Make connections between subjects and your larger personal goals. Change the way you think. Get rid of the negative and start thinking positive. Instead of thinking, I need to get this grade, think, I want to do better than I did last time. Reflect on your progress. Be proud of what you've already done. When you find a good source of motivation, your work will become more enjoyable, more creative, and higher quality.
Okay. So this extrinsic and intrinsic rewards is something that you will find when you go out to work very quickly. You will find that there is a balance between intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic is what keeps you in the job. Extrinsic is what gets you in the job, because you're going to really need to feel good about your job, and that's what intrinsic reward comes from. The pay, you get used to the pay, and you get used to the hours, and you get used to things like that. That doesn't motivate you in the long term. The intrinsic stuff motivates